now that I live in Pittsburgh. I did not when I was in New York City. I have a car. It's not a very expensive car. I'm not really that interested in it. It has good insurance. I don't have very high levels of trust for anybody who wants to borrow it. Comes. If you can give me some extra cash, go for it. Now, the sort of idea that I would really be trust-obsessed in order to share cars means I'm reinforcing the very materialism of those idiots who just fetishize their vehicles. So I think different levels of trust are for different types of sharing, and I don't think one could just say there is one trust system, or that trust, for example, is portability. Just because you trust me to sleep under my house in Airbnb does not mean that I'm going to let you use my coffee machine. And that's a purely skill-based reason. It's a complicated thing, by the way. All right, so it's important that I kind of also lay out, just as Trebor was indicating, what I mean by design. And I'm focusing in a very particular area for a very particular reason, which has to do with some of the research I do, but also because of something that I'm seeing at the conference. And so I'm not talking about the overall global value proposition which you might arrive at through design thinking. I'm not obviously talking about this stuff right down the bottom, which is that everybody has to have an outlined written name, website, title, brand, logo type. It's amazing, sometimes you see these slides and it will show you 20 different people in the sharing economy and the branding is 100% uniform. It's actually really tedious. And I think there are some very important things there to do with what Juliet Shaw was talking about around cultural capital, but I'm not talking in that. And to some extent, I'm certainly not talking about the coding side. I really want to spend some time talking about this kind of something between UX and interface design. And I'm not talking about all types of sharing or collaboration or cooperativism. So I'm not particularly interested in gift economies. I'm not talking about issues of democratization. I'm not talking about unionization. I'm not talking about some of the platforms for finance. I'm very specifically talking about this bit that is closer to peer servicing but might have something to do with lending of things. So I'm looking at that kind of gap there, and I'm thinking about interaction design in that space. So then I'll begin with some principles in general. So it's always very dangerous coming to an event like this, filled with hardcore lefties, to basically say, you need design, and we already heard at the beginning of the conference, no, we don't. This should be a struggle. And I am sympathetic to that to some extent, but so I do want to say, yes, design commodifies. That actually is its power. And it is a pharmacon, it is both a poison as well as a kind of cure. What it does is make a compromise between quality and quantity. Somebody comes up with an original idea. If you want to scale it, you hire a designer, and they will channel you in an efficient way. And it will make a slightly unpleasant experience slightly less unpleasant, perhaps. And when design does that, it is enabling. And it makes particular activities easier or more delightful. I think it's important to say that designers are not only in the job of just uber conveniencing, and that's a redundant term now, uber conveniencing all things. They don't want to just turn us into a kind of a liquid realm of total servicization. Some designers recognize that actual value means you want to struggle for it. And the reason why you want everything else to be convenient is so that you can focus on the things you really care about. And designers can also help that. They can create gym equipment that is very hard to use so that you can feel good about your body the next time you take a selfie on Instagram. So designers smooth, and some of you may realize that this is Temple Grandin's design for a slaughterhouse. It actually equips us, or not us, but in this case non-human actants, to move in particular directions. And I think this is very important for understanding the kind of political argument I'm trying to make about design and what I think it can do in this space, and why I think it's very important and why I think I share this with Trebor, I hope. So this is an abstract chart, and it basically says there are, let's call them heroes. Ezio Manzini calls them heroes over on your far left. And they are people who are so committed to a particular project, a particular cooperative, particular politics, that they will go out of their way to do something. And they will struggle very hard and they will innovate. They will actually come up with social innovations about how to do it. And they will work tirelessly and they will exhaust themselves and almost die doing it. And then over here, there are large numbers of people who you are never going to convert. They only have this level of motivation. I think what is really important for this conference to understand, and why I'm arguing against what Janelle said at the very beginning, about, I'm not sure we need design to kind of make all this that much easier. I think it's really important to understand that I think most people, this is kind of my political claim, and it's a very liberal one, I apologise, I think most people are at that middle bar. They have a significant motivation to do something normally political and progressive, but they are living in a precarious neoliberal world in which they have very little time to do it. They are harried. They are jumping from one job to the other, so the amount of time they've got to go to a cooperative meeting is limited. So I think this is the difference that design can make to that middle group. Design is not going to get people who are not politically committed to do something they don't want to do. It will actually enable a bunch of people who would love to do it if they could, doing it. And that's the kind of interaction design that I want to speak about. All right, so the third principle, again, I think is particularly important and rather theoretical. I think it's very important to understand that we, at this conference in general, if I can propose a kind of consensus position, we do all uphold the social as very important. And we sometimes even hyperstatize it as a thing. It's fantastic when it's there. But I think there's a real danger that we think it's there in its purity. And so I'm much fonder of kind of positions that emerge from people like Bruno Latour, who might come along and say all sociality is mediated materially. That in fact we delegate our sociality. So right now you're all sitting very quietly listening to me yell at you in an Australian accent because the chairs enable you to do it. You would be much more restless standing. We do civilization through things. And so designers are actually always engaged in political activities whenever they materialise anything. Here is a silent policeman, more common in the UK and Australia, I think, than in the United States, but here it is telling you not to run over somebody as if it is a person. It is literally a kind of animated part of nature. So I think it's very important to see that designers are always doing social work. And the flip side is that the social is also not pure like a gift economy as if we were naked in a forest. The social itself is, and I'm kind of paraphrasing Dave Graeber here very badly, don't tell him, but the social is always monetised, it is always instrumentalised. I think it's terrible when people say the sharing economy is not sharing because you hand over money. Those are the sort of people who think don't ever lend money to a friend. Whereas I think friendship is those you lend money to when they need it. And you may not always hope for it all back, and you might get very pissed off with them. And you might, in the end, hope that there's some website by which you can send them an anonymous email that says, by the way, remember you owe me money, I really need it back. Not because I'm a bank, but because I'm also a friend. Can you do some reciprocal altruism, please? So I think it's very important to always say sociality is always contaminated by the material and by the economic. There is no pure social, pure gift. And for that reason, I think design plays a really crucial role in this. The last one is to say that I'm here speaking to you because I am very worried as someone who educates designers that right now there are amazingly political decisions being made at a very micro level, being made in the very materialisation of the interactions that we engage in by people who've never studied sociology or anthropology and wouldn't know politics if it slapped them in the face. We need to be politicising designers amazingly because they are making these decisions. So I'll show you a horrible thing. I did wonder how many people come to New York in this conference and staying at an Airbnb. So just to confess that I'm part of the enemy here. So I filled in a form that an interaction designer designed, I bet without having ever done a kind of survey design course in sociology. So someone designed a form, I filled in that form, and then an interaction designer delivers this version of me to the world. And if you know me, despite how loudly I yell, I never ever use exclamation marks. And this is an utter embarrassment to me. So I have been profiled in a particular way. And I'm not talking about NSA profiling or stop and frisk me or PD profiling. I'm talking about being presented in this way. This is very useful. I'm a white middle-class male, and so I can get top dollar on Airbnb. If I'm an African American or an Asian American, I cannot get top dollar on Airbnb. So they're doing some wonderful politicisation of my very identity as they present me to this economy. Okay, so these are the kind of prefaces. I think these politics are occurring at this very micro level. So now to something like the patterns or principles that I would suggest we be thinking about when we ask what should designers be doing to enable platform cooperativism from the interaction design perspective. And to do that, I would say that I understand the space that we are all in, but particularly this bit that's about peer service, to be a very interesting situation in which suddenly money is not the only currency. So I think it's very interesting that we are now in a situation in which people are negotiating on the continuum of money to time, depending on their skill level or their access to other people to do it with, or other people with the skills that they can't do it with but could learn it with. So we are somewhere on this kind of spectrum. And all sharing economy platforms are enabling this kind of decision. Supposedly you go back to this picture like me and you think, well, he is, what have I said about myself there? I'm at Carnegie Mellon University, it's in my profile, and I'm a coffee Nazi, so I'm worth paying top dollar for. But if I didn't share your values, you would now recognise that the cheapness is going to add social cost. It's dollar plus social cost is the total cost. And this is an interaction design platform in which somebody is making this decision. It is absolutely an interaction design platform, as we've heard already. So here are the nasties doing a bit of politicisation through interaction design, through the very interaction design that when they did this revealed that the whole thing was a lie, by the way. The interaction design is a lie. The cars do not represent actual cars floating around New York City. They are merely representative of what could be there. And here you saw that you could press the de Blasio button and make them all disappear. You can do this in reverse as an interaction designer. As I said to Trebor Scholz, I could decide, do I want to get an Uber lift from someone who has 1 child or 3 children? And maybe I want to go with a 3-child one because they need the money more. Nasty piece of social engineering by interaction design, but an interesting proposition. Do you want a car right now because you're uber important and you need to be somewhere very conveniently? Or are you prepared to wait for someone whose rating system has been dropping recently and looks like they're about to join the ranks of the unemployed again, even though they're not currently employed by Uber? Do you want to have that person? So are you prepared to wait 10 minutes to do some politics? This is very easy to do as an interaction design. It's a very easy proposition to kind of put forward. A couple of other quick points around this same area, almost to finish. I think what's also going on, as we see, is we spend a lot of time talking about the future of work. I think Marina's going to talk a little bit around this kind of context. And we all understand that as we move into these situations of gig economies, our very identity is changing. When I shake your hand at a party and they say, what do? Do I tell you I'm an Uber driver and an Airbnb on the weekend, or do I tell you that I'm a budding script writer? Right? Which of these / do I give you? My identity is now at stake. And it's not only at stake in whether you decide to make a purchase with me, it's actually at stake in our very engagement. I think what's particularly interesting about this peer service economy at the moment is that it's a situation in which people are no longer hiding behind the roles of being employees. So you know that when I go to a hotel and there is a concierge, I can teach them like shit. I can, not teach them. I treat them like shit because they're nobody to me. And I'm nobody to them. It's just a job. It's a transaction. It's a purely commercial relation. I cannot do that in Airbnb, both because there is some dangerously designed reputation system we're going to rate each other at the end, but also actually just because it's face-to-face. As Eleanor Ostrom says, if you're going to have commons, make sure these people are engaged before and after the transaction face-to-face. Fundamental rule. Not something that you can necessarily design, though you could use Lumia to do some decision-making, but something that you would actually have to try and work out. How are these people going to relate to each other? All right, so
1 minute?
1 minute to kind of say, I think what's partly going on when you are designing commons, someone just tweeted this particular link, for example, when you're using Eleanor Ostrom to kind of inform the interaction designers that you are playing in this particular spectrum. You want people to be identifiable. Now that we have true identity, thanks to Facebook on the net, this is great because I can now have certain trust factors just go out the window because I know I can find you. And yet on the other hand, we know that the cost of punishing in a commons is aided by anonymity. So it's why the internet kind of worked originally, because it was anonymous and people were able to punish each other. They punished each other too much, it turned into flaming wars, it was a giant mess. But on the other hand, you want a balance between identifiability and anonymity. And by the way, I'm totally not talking about the kind of NSA side to this. But just purely in the kind of interaction design of how much information do I reveal and show at particular points. Do I allow anonymous rating? Do I allow personalized rating? Do I show you a picture of the face of the person you're rating? Do I show you a picture of the family of the person you are rating when you rate that person? And then you want to look at group. It needs to be an identity. I think as was indicated before, trust happens when people have an identifiable group structure. But then you also want scale. Everybody wants scale. Robin Chase was just berating us that we're not going enough after huge scale and thanking the initial risks for doing that. But obviously, to some extent, you're going to have very different versions of cooperation depending on the scale. All of these will change. You will have too many people to actually administer the commons, etc. These are all the interaction design things that I think we need to be doing. It's a long-standing problem in relation to the design of group behavior on the internet, and I think that we are just in that same situation. Sorry, rushed through it at the end there. Thank you. Goodbye.
I'm going to be radical and not use any slides today. For me, I'm going to do speaker commando. Going to go speaker commando. No slides, no props, and share with you some of the things that we're doing at the Institute for the Future. This year, we started something called the Workable Futures Initiative, which builds on years of work thinking about the future of work. Now everybody's talking about the future of work. And some of the things that we're looking at, obviously we're trying to understand new patterns of work. We're also interested in thinking about what's the new generation of platforms. Can we design what we call positive platforms, which is, I'll explain why that is important to us. We view this sort of emergence of the platforms that we see all around us today is not something that's going to go away. We see it as a part of kind of a larger transformation in terms of how we create value. We see it increasing, we see it growing and entering a lot more domains of our lives. The reason for that is that if you think about it, about Uber or Ship or whatever platform you think about, they didn't just appear yesterday or today. They are the result of decades of technology, layering of technologies on top of each other. So it's actually a pretty gradual evolution. It's starting, I mean, you can think about roads. Roads as a platform, but that's going way, way back. But you think about technologies, the connective technologies, the internet. That by itself wasn't enough. What we needed to add is sensors. And we needed to add geolocation technologies that allow us to find where things are at any time and connect. Then we have data analytics technology. Now we have machine learning technologies. And this is going to continue to progress. So whatever platforms we're seeing today, that's not the end point. We're going to see these platforms evolve and change. There's going to be more data created. There's going to be more data used and so on. But we see it as kind of a big ongoing transformation. And basically, as many people at this conference talked about, what it enables a degree of coordination that previously was only possible through management structures. If you think about organizations as a technology, we had that technology. It was a hierarchical with managers, basically allocating tasks, knowing where to send people, giving information, trading information. Actually, when we think about workers, the people I really worry about are managers. That's the layers that's being really replaced by software, APIs, and automation. Even if you think about Uber, what Uber is doing is basically replacing Danny DeVito's role in taxi, right? That's what Uber is. It's a modern version of Danny DeVito, right? So that's what I worry about. I worry about these layers of management that we need to worry about in terms of being replaced. So, but given that basically all of these functions are increasingly being automated, And API is kind of the new, our software is a new coordinating structure for how we create value. The question is, these APIs are not, they don't come to us from above, right? We create those APIs. They're human creations. So can we think about what would be, as humans, design into those APIs? And I don't mean to say that the only thing we need to worry about is technology itself. There are a lot of values and a lot of affordances we can put into those technologies, but they, by themselves, they are not enough. We need to think in terms of design of just, not just technologies. We need to think about design. What is our social contract? You know, our social contract, the social safety net that we have today, we inherited from 1950s. Basically, it was auto companies that drove what we have now. Things have changed a lot. You know, what we need in terms of healthcare, what we need in terms of all kinds of protections and all kinds of things. We need to be thinking about what's the new social contract, or even what's the new social safety net in this new environment where platforms and coordination platforms. There are a lot of things that sort of we need to be thinking about, including from technology perspective, including from the policy perspective, including skills. What is the skills that we need to be successful in this world? So that's kind of the agenda for the Workable Futures Initiative that we actually got funding from Knight and Ford Foundations, which we're very pleased with. So what we're doing in this first year, we're doing several things. One is we're doing deep ethnographic interviews and observations with people who are kind of extreme users of, they're extreme workers. They're doing things with on-demand platforms in different ways. And we've now completed 40 in-depth interviews, observations with people in Miami, San Francisco, Chicago, and New York. And the local patterns are different. That's why we need to be looking at these different locations. For example, in San Francisco, you can rent your closet in downtown San Francisco and actually make money that way. I don't think you can do it in Iowa. Maybe you can. I'm not sure. Not yet. Anyway, so we're doing these ethnographic interviews to understand what is people's experience. You know, when you interview people, they don't talk about on-demand economy. They don't talk about coordination economy. They don't talk about what is the language that they're using when they're describing this experience of working. They talk about working on apps. You know, I work for an app. Or they say, you know, this thing pings me when I have a job. So we want to understand their language in which they're describing their experience. The other thing we're doing, which is we're trying to understand the labor economics of platforms. There's very little research that's been done. Arun's doing some, several people, I'm sure lots of people here are probably doing this kind of research, but labor economics of platform is different than labor economics of firms. There's some interest, and it's connected to design. So there are some interesting things that we're finding out. So, you know, we're all supportive of Fight for 15 and minimum wage. When it turns out on some platforms, not a lot of platforms, when you establish that bottom minimum wage, actually people end up making less money than if they negotiate their rates directly. That's kind of a mind bender, right? So we need to, we don't understand a lot of that yet. And as these platforms evolve, we're getting more and more data. It may not be true for all platforms. So, well, what platforms is it true for? What do we need to be doing? Finally, it's interesting that I follow you, Cameron, about the design. You know, years ago, we had no discipline of interaction design. Right? When the first websites were creating, the interface was pretty terrible. Alan Cooper, I don't know if you remember, Alan Cooper was one of the first interaction designers, wrote a famous book, The Lunatics Are Running the Asylum, in which he basically complained about that all these decisions about our interactions with devices and web and everything else is basically done by engineers who are not particularly good at user interface. And I think the same thing is happening sort of with platforms. I feel in many ways the lunatics are running the asylum in terms of platform design. So can we develop it as a discipline of positive platform design? How do we get these people, thank you. How do we get people who are designing today for Facebook and whatever they're working, to really think about the social implications. How do we get philosophers into the programming, into working side and sociologists and anthropologists and all of these people? We need to totally reshape who is driving design of these platforms. So in terms of what we're seeing, we're just completing this round of analysis on the interviews, ethnographic interviews, and kind of thinking about, well, what are some of the principles? So this is early on, and I'm just going to share some of the things that we're finding out that are interesting in terms of positive platform design. And again, I want to emphasize, it's not just about technology. It's also around larger design of social systems and social issues. But some of the things that we're thinking that are interesting. Increasingly, what these platforms are going to be able to do is really match people a lot better to the tasks that they're really good at. Literally, we're not that far off from thinking where the tasks are going to be pinging you. So the tasks are going to be looking for people to do them, rather than we are going to be looking for tasks for us to do. With machine learning and all these systems that basically can really see what are you good at and what is available out there, that's kind of the next level of matching, where people will have, as more and more of this work moves to platforms, this kind of matching capability. So making this matching smoother and more efficient. And if you think about the flow of tasks that's always out there and it's always available, we start thinking of people as being able to plug in and out when they need or when they want. And that's a really positive, not just, by the way, for people who are working for platforms. It's good for people who are working in organizations. I think we have an opportunity to design something. We shouldn't be thinking about designing something to replace what we have, because what we have is not ideal. There are a lot of glitches in what we have. We actually have an opportunity to design something better, and we shouldn't underestimate, and we should be striving for that. So matching is one. Obviously, we want to maximize earning opportunities for people, and this is where that notion of labor economics, we don't quite know what, there are great sites, there are great platforms that want to institute sort of wage limits, and they may not be working for that particular platform. So for each task and each platform, it's worth thinking about what the impacts are. Stability. So the platforms are not stable. If you know, Silicon Valley likes the notion of prototyping and breaking and rebuilding, and it's easy to do when you're on Facebook, or if your income doesn't depend on that. But imagine if you were coming to work and every day or every month, how much you're making is changing, everything is changing, particularly for people who've invested in equipment that they no longer are able. So prototyping has human costs, and that's the other side of prototyping. We should be looking at that. Stability of platforms is really important, and the protocols for changing from this feature to this feature has real human implications and real human costs that we need to be thinking about and smoothing them. There's the issue of transparency. I think transparency is really important. There are two levels of transparency that we need to be thinking about. There is transparency at the level of the algorithm itself, which is proprietary, and people are spending enormous amounts of time trying to figure out how they can maximize their earnings because they don't get it. What is this algorithm? It takes them weeks and months sometimes to figure it out, and the savvy ones do figure it out. There is some level where platforms can basically reveal what are they trying to maximize for, and how can people plug into that so it works from them. It then becomes easier for people to figure out whether it's a right platform for them and it's not the right platform for them, and to choose that. So that's the level of transparency at the level of the algorithm. There's another level of transparency in terms of data. The actual data. Platforms today have more labor data, very granular, very to the point data about labor mobility, about wage mobility, all kinds of things that anybody in the world, right? The Department of Labor, and we work with the Department of Labor, they have no idea what the data is. There's got to be some agreements about sharing of that data, again, without violating privacy, without, it's granted here and there to some researchers. There's no third party looking at that. So there's got to be some level of transparency that we want to institute in this environment. The other thing, it's really hard to negotiate with algorithms. So it's people are struggling. There's no customer support for the workers. Partially, platforms don't want to provide that because they don't want employees to be, these people to be classified as W-2. They could be doing a lot more. And it's crazy that there's got to be some governance issues and sort of ombudsman support. All of these things need to be built into platforms. There are also opportunities for upskilling. Some people still look at platforms as, what am I going to learn here? What am I going to, basically, how do I advance on these platforms? I like what Elance has been doing before the merger, which is, if you want to do this task, these are the skills that you need, and these are 10 places where you can learn that skill. So making it possible for people to integrate upskilling into the platforms, I think really important. Obviously, provide social connectedness. People are doing it themselves. People are creating groups on Reddit. They're creating their own groups and means of aggregating, but again, platforms can do a lot more in terms of providing that kind of social connectedness and the feeling of social, being in a group with others. I think the other kind of important possibility is actually we can use some of these technology to, first of all, uncover bias in hiring. There's a lot of that. If you look at platforms or companies like Unitive that's doing that, which is using AI to uncover language that's biased in terms of hiring and distribution of work. A lot of that could be integrated into platforms. We all know the data about Airbnb hosts being paid less and so on. So there are a lot of possibilities. This is just the beginning. This is just something we're beginning to uncover. But I think that what would be great to do is really catalyze a movement for building positive platforms, because ultimately I think that's the future. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe that will help. So hello. I'm trying to fit in the speed presenting here.
Ja, das ist web.
Okay, kann ich beten?
Ja, nee, müsst ihr mir sagen, wo das reinsteht.
Other side.
Andere Seite.
Okay, while Trebor is so kind to plug in my computer. My name is Vanessa Barth. I work for a German union, a big union, 125 years old, 2.3 million members, metal worker union, not only for metal workers, also for academics. And this year we launched a platform that wants to promote a better design for platforms. And now that I'm in this workshop with all those people about these many good ideas about design, I have to admit that we outsourced the design of the platform. So there's work for designers. Yeah, and we pay them very well. But for a very classical reason, we didn't have the know-how on board that time. Today it's different, but this is another story.
Do you want to
Isn't it?
change the source? This one. Oh, it's this one? Oh, okay.
Okay, and also have the. So, but to tell you the story, I have to make a little explanation about the German labor relations system. I'll have it very short. I learned the word for that is crisp. So we have unions, which you here see on the right side, IG Metall, but we have a law that says that in every company which has 5 employees or more, they will elect a works council. So we have elected representatives of workers within the companies, and they are very often union members. So we have have a strong influence in the companies because those works council have a big say in various fields. So I promise to have it short. So why is it interesting? Because it means that for crowdsourcing, it is also very important in Germany or in countries which have that system to raise the awareness for of works councils for that they have influence in the fact that crowd working is often outsourced by classical companies. I mean, you have all their crowdsourcing offers for like the classical value chain in the companies. So somebody in the company makes a decision to outsource something, and if it works out, the Works Council gets to know of it, and he can try to influence it. For example, that it's only outsourced to platforms that have fair working conditions, which we don't know so many today, but maybe in the future. But this is important to understand the rest of the story. So last year, it was like crowdsourcing in Germany was basically unknown. People would say crowd what? And they would totally not understand what you're talking about. But this changed really radically this year. And actually it was due to another big German union, Verdi, who launched a service for crowd workers, with a big public relation activities. And then at Labor Day this year, 1st of May, we launched FairCrowdWork.org, which is supposed, it had two aims. First of all, that you make a view out of your platform, that you have a cross-platform exchange of working conditions, because we know from research that most workers stick to one or two platforms. They don't walk around platforms. And the other idea was to apply the very, let's say, arbitrary rating system and review system to the platforms themselves, and look where this will go. And I'll show you the review tool, parts of it. So we invited crowd workers to review their platforms on a very basic level. We tried to learn from Tonkinwise, so that any transparency will help. And then, at the left side, you see like 1990 that will be platforms, and you see the 5-star rating, which we learned today that it's totally untrustful, which I agree. We tried our best, but it's a very basic thing. And the other thing is that, as a whole, we have a terms and condition check, which is conducted by lawyers, experts, so it's not a peer-to-peer review, but it's that lawyers look at the terms and conditions of platforms so that we can discuss them actually. And now you will ask, okay, who cares for the terms and conditions? And I agree, the platforms don't do, because after we launched the platform, some platform people came to us, the owners, the CEOs of the platforms, and said, okay, we have to talk with you. And then we say, okay, we want to talk about your terms and conditions. And then they would say, oh, we copied them. Actually, we don't really know what's there, which is also responsible behavior. And we also found out that the workers don't care. It's just like you click them away and they say, I agree, like you do on Facebook or anything. But still, it was very useful for the political debate, because these terms and conditions really contain regulations which are just unfair. And we don't want to see it in today's working world. So we can make a strong point. So reaction. Well, we had a huge media attention, which was one reason was that it's a new topic for Germany, and the other reason was nobody would have expected the Metal Workers Union to launch such a platform. So, well, we didn't expect that much attention, but it was really helpful, because, as I said, it was launched for a week or two, and then we got the first calls from platforms, platforms in Germany, and said, okay, we have to talk with you. And we also made, this is Gesamtmetall, this is an employer association that the IG Metall usually does the collective bargaining for the metal and electrical sector. And they, I would say that until the day that a journalist asked them and said, what do you say in crowdsourcing? Probably they didn't know as well what. I mean, that statement looks a bit like this. But of course, what do employers say in a normal situation? Oh, we don't need no regulation. These people are free contractors. You know, they know very well how to do so. So you don't have to do anything about it. And they said, of course, it's not important because we cannot imagine that, like in the core areas of our companies, like the engineering of or design of cars, you could apply it, which is not true, because we have these platforms where that takes place. So, and another nice reaction was that 3 platforms actually felt so much under pressure that they say, okay, we're going to launch a code of conduct. And this code of conduct contains very fuzzy points, but also some very precise. For example, they say, okay, we want to take care that we only have reasonable tasks, so no shady tasks like criminal tasks or whatever. And but of course they say fair pay, and they don't really say what is fair pay. And one thing that I want to raise your awareness of is like the whole privacy topic. I mean, you can look it up in the internet. I don't go into the very depth, but they have one point in this terms and conditions. They say, okay, we collect a lot of data, and we promise we're not going to pass it on to somebody else. Well, that's good. But the interesting thing is, what do they do themselves with the data? Because they have lots of data. Actually, these platforms are working spaces under total surveillance. And it's just not fair, and it has to end. So according to the analog world, we would say that we need something like a Platform Constitution Act that makes clear rules for democracy on the platforms. Because if you look at this is a typical profile from freelancer, I think. I mean, this fake freelancing person is totally transparent for the platform. And I would say that each action she does on the platform can be tracked. So the platform knows whom she is whom she is talking to, or whom she is connected. And I just give you one story. The moment we launched the platform, we got an email from a lady who worked on platforms, and she's texting, writing. And she told us that story that she had a conflict with the platform owner or the administrator, whatever. And so she was dismissed, we would say. I mean, they closed down her account, but not only her account, but also her husband's account. So why did they know? You know? So I mean, this has to stop. I mean, in a company with a proper co-determination model, the elected representatives of the workers would have a say in what is displayed here, and that the workers could also influence what is displayed here. So, and this is totally not how we see it's totally imbalanced. So, what's next? And now my colleague 6 is going to tell you. I mean, can you imagine? What do you think? Did people use the reviewing tool, workers? What's your guess?
No.
Yeah, no. Well, I should have asked you before here. Well, they do, but not to an extent that they were satisfied. This is why we're working at the beta version of the review tool, and 6 is going to introduce it to you now.
Thank you. How many minutes do I have, Trevor?
5, 6.
Okay. So I guess I know most of you in this community from work that I've done for the past 5 or 6 years with my colleague Lily Irani with Turkopticon. And one of the things that we've learned from Turkopticon is that people care really strongly about how you design the reputation systems that they rely on to make a living. And one of the things that we learned is that the review criteria that we've been using on Turkopticon for the last 6 years, like a 1 to 5, essentially a star rating system for something like fairness of the work evaluation process, or how good is the pay, or how good is the communication that you had, becomes an object of contention for the workers that are relying on the reputation, on the ratings that are left by others. So if somebody else says, oh, this is a 5-star requester, and I have different standards than that person, that average rating becomes completely unusable to me, and I have to spend hours reading the reviews that other people have left, looking at the review histories of the people who have left the reviews to determine if those people are like me and if I trust their evaluations. And so, I came to IG Metall earlier this year, and we were thinking about, okay, well, how can we build an information resource that's useful for workers on lots of different platforms? And after thinking about it for a while, we kind of came to the conclusion that we have to throw away this fixed review criteria. I am not confident yet in coming up with a list of review criteria that apply usefully to all platforms. So the best idea that we have right now is to create, well, a phrase that probably people in this room will understand, a knowledge commons, a wiki. The question of how open it should be, especially at the beginning, is still very open, and I'd like to have a conversation with people who care about having access to a knowledge commons about platform-based work. And I can leave this up. I don't know how well you can see it, but you can come closer if you want. I'll just leave this up here. What I would like to do, what I can imagine, is to have maybe slightly structured, but basically qualitative information, sentences, paragraphs, some statistics, links to studies, summaries of studies, human-generated syntheses of what do we know about Upwork? What do we know about Bitcoin-based platforms that are managed as cooperatives? What do we know about this platform, that platform? What do we know about legal regimes in different countries? What do we know about the situations that workers find themselves in when they're living under one legal regime, working for a platform that's administered under another legal regime, for a client that's operating under another legal regime, and they have a conflict? Who's going to adjudicate that? What law applies? What, hypothetically, workers' organizations have jurisdiction or a mandate to represent that worker's interests, and so on. So, any questions?
Let's keep them to the end.
Okay.
What's the URL?
This, there is a URL, I can give it to you. It's a shitty 2-page prototype that I cocked together in 4 hours.
Yeah.
So it looks like this, but I will give it to you. And it's a subdomain that I'm just sort of sitting on. If I type in here, can you see it?
Yes.
You can click login when you go there, and it'll go to a form, and you can type things in the form, and you click submit, and nothing will happen. So this is very much idea phase.
We have one of those.
Good. So you can go there. So somebody tell me if you go there and it doesn't work. I wasn't actually planning to demo,
Sorry.
but you asked, so there.
Works, looks good.
Good. Okay. Ah, it looks good. Okay.
We are fighting about the right design.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So Platformpedia is sort of the concept. The if you held a gun to my head and said, "What's the URL going to be?" That might be what I would give you. And so we're really open to how can we make an information resource that's useful for workers, platform operators, prospective clients that care about building a just future of platform-based work together. Obviously, something like this has to be a resource for lots of different stakeholders, including policymakers, journalists, researchers. There should be a page on there, probably, that says, what research needs do we have? And if you're a researcher in X field, who might be able to fund your research project? Right? So, and then the deep question that I think has been talked about a huge amount at this conference in all kinds of different platform contexts is how do we build a sustainable, equitable, participatory work process around this, right? So we work in a labor union, and the labor union has really, really strong rules, some of those based in laws that are applied to labor unions, about data protection, right? And so we have to navigate very carefully these rules when we design a participatory process for people to give us data that we're going to put on the internet, maybe without even verifying it first, right? So this is highly abnormal in the German labor context, but we need to observe those rules because those are rules that have protected German workers for decades while designing a participatory process within that context. So if anybody's really interested and has ideas, we're very open. That's one of the reasons that we're here, so we can talk to people and think about what this should look like. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, it's there. Great. But you must take the one on the left side. On the right side, it doesn't work.
Okay. And on the left side. Yeah, thank you. I'm happily hacking. Okay. So. Not my machine. Okay. I just need the file to read what's on this. Going to, oh, great. Should say co-op. Yeah, that one. Great. And the PDF. Great. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Hi. I'm Micky, and this is a little bit of a divergence from design on the outside, but this is about the design of my cooperative that I belong to. And to a lot of people, it's really a mystery of how is a cooperative organized. So I'm just going to give you the 10-minute view of what my cooperative is organized like and how do we do this. Because that's a starting point for people, putting together their cooperatives so that they can design things. So the traditional choices we have in the world, everyone knows, a freelancer, you do everything yourself, you have to kind of chase that job, and an employee, we all know that someone else has control, but as a worker owner, you can decide with your coworkers as to what you would like to do. What is a worker cooperative? Is there anyone here who doesn't know what a worker cooperative is? Can I skip this slide? Thank you. Okay, great. My cooperative is named Agaric. We're 5 people. 3 of us are based in Boston. 1 is in Hamburg, Germany. The other is in Managua, Nicaragua. So basically the way that works is we're formed as an LLC, and they have their own companies in their other countries. So there is Agaric Germany, and there will be Agaric Nicaragua. So my company is a web development cooperative. We basically use Drupal, which is a content management system that a lot of large websites are built on. And we do other types of programming too, but this seems to suit people to be able to get their hands on a website and they can maintain it or manage it themselves. We like to give as much ownership to people as they can because they are the ones who are designing their environment for the members that they have for their site and stuff. So we're more of a facilitators to design. Agaric uses governance of consensus, 1 worker, 1 vote, very standard procedure for cooperatives. We're very small, so we don't have a thing like a board. We've been talking about it, but with 5 of us, we pretty much keep pretty close in touch as to what is going on. And one of the benefits is that we can help people design things by taking on internal projects that are dear to our heart. If someone says, I'd like to do this, and we figure, oh, wow, that's a great tool for humanity or for a community, and it can be replicated in different places. Someone could just download this free software that we create, and they could just change the names in it and have an instance of it for their community. I feel that's very important. It enables people to take that first step instead of how do I put this thing together. It's already there for them and maybe needs a little bit of modification because, as you said, there's not a cookie cutter template for any type of gig that you want to do. So we're registered as an LLC, as I said, and all the members are partners, and we're all workers and owners. The laws are different in different states, so you might have to take on a different type of entity. There are lots of talk about states adopting a T corporation, which is structured as a cooperative platform instead of like an LLC, which is more relegated to a hierarchical business. Anyway, we use it, we operate as a cooperative, but we're registered as an LLC. We have no hierarchy, there's no CEO, we're all the same. So the projects, we work with free software, and we take on projects that, to build platforms that are used as a service. That's one of our main interests, that people can use this without the barrier to entry of price or a lot of learning, a big steep learning curve. So one thing we're working on is a thing called Power to Connect. It would allow you to have all your assets online, and people can use a cell phone to connect and find out what topical things or meetings that you're having. The thing about it is it can be used by the 5.6 billion people that don't have a smartphone. And when you're designing, I think that's a very important thing to take into mind. You're cutting off the hugest part of the world when you're not designing for people without smartphones. And this tool could be used for people who have member voting or shared documents that need to be shown on a whole bunch of different devices, so that you don't have to have your presentation on a stick or anywhere. You can just have it, and it's wherever you go in the world, you can access it. We're building a dispatch system that could be replicated and used for different objectives, different companies, different purposes. The one we're building is for a local waste management company that is a cooperative, and they hire people from the neighborhood and work with them and work them into the cooperative. Each cooperative has their own onboarding type of system. These are things you would vote on that are specific to you. In our world, the web development, we usually work with someone as a freelancer. And if they're interested and if projects come about, it kind of just is an organic way of growing, instead of going, we need someone who has a hammer, let's get that guy. It's like, that's the typical way of corporations finding someone. So we're very adamant about working with free tools because they are accessible to everyone. And if people can't access the tools, yes, they are stuck, and they are beholden to someone who does own the tools. And when you look behind the curtain, those tools aren't really doing what you thought they did most of the time. So it's important to own your tools, and the Free Software Foundation does a good job of getting that message out. So just demystifying adding members to our cooperative. We add new worker owners and decide to grow when it feels organically right. And it's hard to explain, but being a very small cooperative, you have a lot of control over that. You have discussions, you get to know people, which I'm very anti-transaction. I think business transaction is a real fault that the world was built on. We don't know people, and we're doing these transactions. Of course it's going to get crazy and screwed up. So this is more built on a trust thing. And what Agaric does is we've calculated a valuation for our company, because you can't just say, oh, come on in, we like you because you've got a hammer. Right, and you can do this one thing. So that valuation, since we can't ask people to give a huge chunk of money coming into our cooperative, we break it up over several years. And leaving the cooperative, if someone leaves, that is kind of like what a corporation would call severance pay now, or whatever. There's like, you usually get, what, a month or 2 months of the year, your salary or whatever. Well, whatever you have put in when you decide to leave in Agaric, you would get that back. All right, so once again, this is really important that we understand why we're using free software, because we're building platforms. You cannot build freedom on someone else's slavery thing. You can't do it. They'll tell you you can, but they'll swear you can, and they'll sell you something else to make you believe you can. I suggest you, if you don't know about that, take a trip to the fsf.org. This slide's kind of tiny. These slides are available on SlideShare, and you could just search for cooperative development. These are other links of interest. I want to keep this really short, but I am accessible. If anyone has questions about how to form a cooperative or how to join one or how to transition the company that you're working in that you love, to transition it into a cooperative, I'm not going to do all that. I don't know all of that, but I do have connections that I could introduce you to that could help you walk through these steps. And there is funding available for your great ideas that can help humanity. So don't be shy. No question is too stupid. No idea is too stupid, because in this world, a lot of great ideas have come from a stupid suggestion. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Nathan Matias. I'm a PhD student at the MIT Media Lab in the Center for Civic Media, and also a fellow at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society. And I may also be the successful operator of slide technologies. Excellent. And I'll be sharing work that I also did while an intern at Microsoft Research. To give you a little background on myself, I have a pretty eclectic background both in tech startups, where I've worked on technologies that have reached over 1 billion people, but I also have a background in post-colonial literature, and I've thought a lot about ways that media and technology have played a role both in oppression and liberation. And those are questions that I think about in my PhD. And a good framing question for the work that I think about is this wonderful statement that Juliet shared yesterday in this very room, that platforms can enhance inequality. And where might that inequality come from? We could think about elements in the design of platforms, but we can also think about ways that people behave in ways that enhance inequality on platforms, things that Juliet was talking about. And we can also think about things in the governance and moderation of those systems that could also contribute to those problems. And it's that intersection that my work looks at. So for example, people have lauded the liberatory possibilities of citizen media, social media networks, and blogs for broadening whose voices we hear in society. And I've done work to quantify what sources are used by citizen media. And I found that the kind of power laws of winner takes all also tend to apply, even when we're creating alternative media. And a nice example of that in the case of platform design is this study by Salganik, Watson, and co., which showed that on music platforms, where people can find and recommend music, the quality of the song is not necessarily a predictor of how well the song will do, but actually it's this winner-takes-all scenario that people follow what other people think is popular. So that's one source of inequality. We can think about problems of discrimination and bias, and that's work that, together with Sarah Salovitz, I've been able to document how among journalists who are using social media as sources, journalists exhibit gender preferences. Not only are women a small percentage of who journalists pay attention to and quote, but they're also a small percentage of who they follow on Twitter, and that men tend to follow even fewer women on social media. And together with Hannah Wallach, I've done work to think about the things outside of platforms or outside of news organizations that also shape the representation of women. So we can talk about the roles that editors and selection on front pages and journalists, the decisions they make inside of organizations that shape the representation of women, and the really appalling degree to which women's voices are not part of public discourse. But once that article kind of leaves publication and enters the realm of our social worlds, audiences also exhibit certain kinds of bias and discrimination. And together with Hannah Wallach at Microsoft Research, we've been working to do statistical modeling of that and observe it. And then there are ways that the designs of platforms actually interacts with our own biases. There's this really nice paper by Jason Radford that looks at a specific decision made by Donors Choose. Donors Choose is this platform that matches donors with teachers so that if you want to donate money and school supplies to schools across America, you can do so. It's a really amazing like peer crowdfunding platform. And there was a moment in the design of this platform where they thought, wouldn't it be great if we included the marital status of the teachers asking for money? And so they added it right there. And Jason found that simply that one change, introducing the marital status of the teacher, had a significant effect on the amount of money that different teachers would get. Firstly, male teachers got more. Secondly, people tended to give to teachers who are in more stereotypical fields. So if you have a male teacher in engineering, that teacher would get more than a female teacher in engineering compared to how it was before they introduced the marital status. One tiny little design change, as we've been hearing earlier, designers need to be thinking about the politics that they're introducing into these systems. And then, of course, there are many examples of discrimination among sellers and buyers in different kinds of markets. In this particular study, they did a field experiment where they sold iPods on a kind of a local online marketplace in all sorts of parts of the United States. And some of the photos of the iPods had a hand that was light-skinned, and some of the other photos of the iPods had a hand that was dark-skinned. And they found that black sellers received fewer responses, fewer offers, the offers were lower, and that people had lower trust for black sellers, where black meant the photograph of the iPod had lighter or darker skin. So another example, there's really great work by Ari Lampinen that looks at kind of pay-it-forward style systems where you try to create a system where people from different classes or circumstances can give into a network and get out from a network equally. But she found that people often were reluctant to accept help from higher status, higher class people than them because they were worried about this sense of obligation, something that was very hard for the designers to overcome. And Ari has written extensively about that problem, to the point of wondering if actually, in order to have successful sharing systems, what you needed to do is just match people on class and only have people share things with people who are like them, which is, to me, a kind of depressing prospect.
That's the de facto.
It is the de facto in society. And then you have these questions of governance and whether oligarchy is actually something that tends to naturally occur over time. Something that Aaron Shaw and Mako Hill have shown to be the case in a sample of hundreds of wikis on the site Wikia. So we might stop here and feel pretty depressed. You have ranking and trending systems that support inequality. You build trust and choice into your system, and you get discrimination and bias. You want to promote sharing and exchange, and you need to reinforce class divides in order to make that work. You try to have self-governance, and what you end up with is oligarchy. This is a pretty demoralizing thing to kind of face. So what can we do about that? I've been really inspired by the work of Six and Lily Irani to think beyond platform design, because often people don't have the power to change those things. What are the things that we can do, acknowledging that we as users of these platforms are part of the problem, and the people engaged in the governance of these platforms are also part of the problem? What can we do to address these things? In short, as Lillian Six said, how do you fix a broken system that isn't yours to repair? And there are a few approaches that I've taken in my work. Part of that is about monitoring, and I've shown you some examples of how we're using data analysis and statistics to monitor these problems. Part of that is to find creative ways to respond. and then evaluate the outcomes of your responses, because you might create a rating system, but as Six said, that rating system could itself, like the things that you use to try to address injustices, could themselves like create new forms of injustice. So evaluation is incredibly important. So I'll run through a few examples. One example is a project that the organization Boku and I, with Knight funding, created called Open Gender Tracking, that helps people create their own analyses of gender disparities in content. And one example of that use is a project that Sarah Salovitz and I have created called Follow Bias, which we're currently testing. And it gives personal feedback to people on gender disparities and who they're paying attention to on Twitter. And we're doing a randomized trial. Given what we know about how gender discrimination works online, does introducing follow bias into someone's experience actually have an effect on who they follow and pay attention to? And we're finishing a round of randomized trials of that now. So there's a monitoring idea. We can monitor things about gender disparities in personal behavior. We can come up with a response, and we then try to design some way of evaluating that response. Another example would be work that I've done with the organization Women Action in the Media. They set up this amazing thing where they were able to kind of get a handle on issues of harassment on Twitter by accepting reports of harassment to their organization and reviewing them and then forwarding them to Twitter, the company. And there was this extended process through which they did that. But they were also, with the consent of people who were reporting harassment to them, able to collect data on that. And I was then able to lead a remarkable team of people to analyze that data, not only to understand what kinds of harassment are people experiencing, but also how is Twitter doing, like, at actually handling different kinds of harassment. Is it doing a good job at hate speech? Is it doing a good job at threats of violence? How many cases of revenge porn is it actually handling when we're able to verify that those are genuine cases? So that's an example of people who aren't able to kind of pull the levers of power at Twitter, providing a meaningful service to people while documenting a wider systemic problem. And there are also some approaches that I've been seeing in my qualitative research with moderators on Twitter that people are using to monitor and hold accountable the people who are carrying out governance online. On this website Reddit, you have over 52,000 communities where there's at least one post a month. And each of those communities has moderators who are like the self-governing appointed leaders of these groups. And there might be legitimate questions about how they're exercising that power. And in this particular case, users of the technology subreddit actually did some investigative data work to notice that all posts about Edward Snowden and the NSA were being automatically deleted by the moderators of one of the most popular subreddits on the site. And here is one of the charts that was generated using data from the Reddit API by one of these citizen investigators who was monitoring the use of power by these moderators. And ultimately, they were able to pressure the company to demote the status of that group, to try to pressure those moderators to change. But the important thing to remember is that the things that we do to monitor and the things that we do to respond aren't I suppose, aren't necessarily fixes that will work for all time. In all of these contexts, we're talking about contestational environments where, whether it's Reddit, where there are groups who are fighting against each other and trying to undermine each other, whether it's the case of trying to hold companies accountable, developing monitoring schemes that then companies find ways to circumvent. This is an ongoing co-evolutionary race, and we need to be aware of the blind spots in the work that we do as well. And so as I kind of look forward, I'm starting to ask myself, what would it mean to help communities kind of have greater power and agency in doing this kind of monitoring themselves? And what does it look like, firstly, to develop participatory processes of this kind of data analysis, participatory processes of even like social experimentation, but even to go a step further to say, can we create infrastructures that allow local contexts to actually do their own data analysis, to do their own experimentation, to ask these questions, so that people can start asking how they can fix broken systems that they don't necessarily have control over. So those are the questions that I ask in my research, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation with folks here. Thank you. Is your presentation?
Is it time for questions?
Oh, yeah, I can get a couple. Sure, of course.
You don't have any.
It's 5 o'clock. It's past 5.
So we need another chair, don't we?
Oh, sorry, take mine.
Three on the side.
There's a chair. We can squeeze in.
I think it's impressive that how this is taken up with the whole thing of crowdworking. Actually, coordination rights on outsourcing are pretty meager German too. You can talk about it, but you cannot block it if it happens. My question is there any planning to take action on the point you discovered that you have no right to reach these workers that are outsourced? You cannot reach them. You can make a platform if someone comes, but in contrast to workers that are actually employed, you do not know who they are, you cannot contact them. And is there any planning to include this to demand that there be a law for it, or to include it in tariff contracts, or to put pressure on this to get this divide that you get a legal right to reach workers that are employed in your factory?
Okay, do you want to collect the questions or do you want me to respond directly?
Well, you can put the stuff.
Okay. So the first thing is that the first thing you said is not perfectly right, because you have influence. Like you can make agreements with companies, that you make guidelines for outsourcing, that you exclude outsourcing to companies that don't have a works council or don't have a collective agreement or something like this. You can do that. It's not perfect and you don't have like the really big control, but you can make it an issue. And you can, I mean, there are many ways, if you're well organized within a company, that you can clearly make influence on it. The other question is, I don't know whether I got it right. I mean, to grasp the legal aspects, or do you mean to reach out to the people as a union? I didn't really understand the...
That's the answer. I think it's obviously part of what the workers' council in a factory needs to be powerful is the ability to reach out to the workers. If you do not know them and cannot contact them, you cannot act powerfully. Well, this is one of the problematic aspects of outsourcing, that you cannot reach out to them.
Okay.
So is there any plan to say, in a kind of agreement with a company, to say, if you do some outsourcing, we claim that you give us the right to reach those workers. Otherwise, we will not allow you to do it. Is this something you bargain about?
Well, I don't understand why we would have to ask the companies to allow us.
Yeah, because you cannot reach them. You cannot write to them.
The platforms. Okay, now I got it. Okay, when we were, okay, now I got it. We talked to the platforms because we thought in the beginning we should just make an open call on the platform and ask the workers to contact us, which is, I mean, I told you, total surveillance. You cannot do it. So what we do now is actually we meet with the platform CEOs And we talked with them, and I said, well, we would like to do a survey together with you on your platform to contact the workers and ask them what you want to change. We asked them also, I mean, we want to know, like, is it your main profession? How much do you earn? What would you like to change about the platform? And we didn't talk with all of them, but the ones we talked to, they agreed actually to do it together, because exactly that because of their problem. Because if you would do it just like that, you could never exclude that there are sanctions for the workers. This is why you have to be very careful. But there are ways, and I'm pretty sure. And the idea is also that if the beta version draws more people to it, then you'll also have the contact with the workers. And the other aspect is where we do have members who work on those platforms as well, because for a certain proportion of the crowd workers in Germany, I mean, it's an additional job. So there are many ways, and yeah. But I don't know why the right to organize in unions should not apply to crowd workers. I mean, it's in the Constitution.
It's yours.
So I would, can I add to that?
Oh, yeah, Matias, please.
Just one thing that, like,
Yeah, here.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
so people like research from digital labor, like Mary Gray's findings, and I know that like your work, Six, and like people who are here at this event who are crowd workers, often crowd workers find the need to communicate and coordinate with each other outside of the platform and have these remarkable ecosystems of conversations and community where they organize. So finding those places where people are already talking to each other is incredibly valuable. And if you follow up on the session from yesterday on organizing labor and platform economies, there was a really great and rich conversation on this issue.
Matias, that's maybe not my role as a moderator, but I can't help but jump in because I actually disagree with that to an extent. So I think we should really not mistake a design intervention, a worker forum on Mechanical Turk, or a collaboration between friends with the union hall. That is not the same thing. So what Christoph Speer asked for is much more substantial and structural than 4 or 5 friends in a group of 500,000. Or, you know, it's not the same thing. And I think there's a real danger to equate those, oh, well, now we have these little networks of friends collaborating. We don't really need a union anymore. Sorry, not my place, but couldn't help it.
But people are organizing.
Yeah.
They are. If you look at what's happening at coworker.org, people are, it's just beginning because there are not enough of them, but people are. Dynamo, right, the M-Turkers and others, so.
Dynamo, Turkopticon, they are wonderful, I celebrate them, but they are not to be equated with unions.
They're not, but because they're not using the same tactics as the traditional unions, but it doesn't say.
They don't reach everybody. You can't get to everybody. Because they're opting in, they're finding it, they're hearing it. Everybody wasn't contacted and told that it exists and that they should be on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the big difference, I think. Yeah. So now to my question.
Oh, we mix up the rocks here, that's nice.
I'm Jerry Mikulski, and I love this panel, and particularly I love the richness of detail, of nuance about the kinds of bias that happen, the ways you can go about this, like you got to build on free, all sorts of rich nuance. And then I'm reflecting on design practices that are like thriving today, like design thinking, which is good on empathy and observation, but not so good on other things. Lean startup culture, you name it. Are there practices that you've seen that you really like that take into account some of the things that you've all pointed out to us? And if there aren't, what would they be like? Or who is doing this really well? Or do you want to start a design practice like that? We would join you. You're here.
There's been some backchat on Twitter for a few people who are doing these things just while that session was going on, so I'll just point to them.
But don't confuse
There
them
are
with
people in this room, I think, who are doing some of that. So, but I do think that it is kind of a new practice because there is a piece of it that's like design of networks and sort of network design, but there's a larger kind of, there's a labor sort of design piece, but there's a larger governance and it's more socio-political kind of design. So I think it is kind of new. And I think one of the issues is people who are designing, they're not thinking that big umbrella.
Right.
So I think there is a kind of need for a new practice.
But I would underline that and say there's a huge deficit, and in fact there's a kind of problem. So I was here just a month ago for the Global Service Design Network Conference, and these are very, I don't want to speak too ill of them, trigger warning, I'm going to speak ill of them. You know, these are human-centered design thinking, design-driven innovation people, and yet all that human-centered empathy goes to the customer.
Yeah.
And you can sort of raise your hand at a conference like that and say, does anyone have human-centered empathy for their employee? And I don't mean to grandstand, but I said that and I got applause like I was Donald Trump saying, you know, put up a wall. Because it was like, oh yeah, we forgot them. So I think it's really important to say, yeah, the whole of service design, for example, is totally looking at customer value and spends very little time. Not in the Scandinavian tradition, I should say, in the North American tradition.
Well, I think it's getting more important for companies that are not companies, but like cooperatives. They advise their clients in things like this that the client may not have any idea about platform designs and how it could make it worse for someone to have these voting things like this. Cooperatives that actually care about the community that they're building this for are obviously, well, not obviously, but they are going to advise people that this may or may not be a good idea. You should maybe bring this to a town hall, talk with this application that you're going to build for the city, talk with the people first, that type of a thing. Whereas a company that's hired to build something and come in just comes in and builds it. They may do some kind of testing or something, you know, feedback mechanism, but I don't think they'll go as deeply as to care about the community that this application is being constructed for.
I'm gonna try to answer. I'll try to be brief but I'll try to answer directly. And I think the answer is no. They're not named practices that do all of these things yet. But there are a lot of conceptual resources that people are starting to tie together. And I think that actually universities are a really good place to look to see where curricula and names for those curricula are starting to emerge, and the sort of emerging communities of practitioners / researchers that are trying to look at the practices, look at the problems, identify the conceptual resources that are available to think about them, and to articulate methodological practices by which people who are researchers or practitioners can say, I am doing this and it is called that, and this is why it's important. Because I think one of the problems that you have in any institutional context, whether you're a consultant getting paid $350 an hour, or if you're a researcher trying to articulate a grant proposal, if you can't point to why what you're doing is important, and I don't think we can do that yet in a way that doesn't take a lot of articulation work, then you're not going to get somebody to go along with what you're doing, and you're not going to be able to pay your rent. So
maybe we'll launch it here. It's new.
And what's interesting to me is that and some of the conceptual resources have been pointed at, and people can take what they like. I mean, economists have been talking about market design for quite a while, and I think that stuff's really relevant. If you don't like that flavor of game theory, Elinor Ostrom has the Common Pool resource stuff, which I think that we're starting to look at now. Participatory design community is starting to get involved with the Elinor Ostrom stuff, and those two fields, which have a lot of family resemblance, are starting to articulate. And I think all of that's really important to connect to professional design and make those resources available to those people and articulate them with the more explicitly ideological commitments like inclusive design, feminist design, post-colonial design, all of this kind of stuff which has been around as conceptual resources among academics and a few designers, and say, look, this is where we need to go if we don't want to see these outcomes in these platforms that we've been seeing.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say, I just want to one point. I mean, it's not only that people don't know what they're doing. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't know what they're doing and that not do it. I mean, for a bad purpose. But of course, there are people. I mean, even in platform design, that is exactly designed that way. I mean, I met people in Munich from a small company. He said, I love 99 designs because I don't have to talk with anybody. I just put my request and I don't have these like really weird designers that want to know everything. I have to discuss everything with them. For me, it's easy, it's cheap, it's perfect. So this also exists. It's not only, I mean, as a German union, we really failed in contacting the technical designers. We have contacts at the universities, but basically at the politics department. Yes, we should have cooperations with the technical departments as well, and we're building it up now because there is an amount of people who just don't know or don't think about. But you also have the others, which really have to fight strongly. It's not only a mistake or lack of consciousness.
Can I add one thing to that, Trevor? So there's a parallel challenge among people who do data science and who do machine learning and who do algorithms. And I think in a lot of the computational social science work, firstly, people aren't in institutions that give them an opportunity to prioritize these things, like the companies they're part of or the research institutions they're part of, which is one way that you can help if you build meaningful cooperatives that have great principles and hire data scientists and say, we actually empower you to ask these questions in your work. And there's another side of that, which is like more conceptual, more research-oriented, which is like developing this is really boring, but like developing the variables that matter. Like we're really good at identifying productivity and efficiency and profit, but there's a lot of work to be done to come up with meaningful definitions of fairness, and there are people like Solon Barakas and Cynthia Dwork who are working on that and trying to advocate for ways of thinking about that in machine learning and in the data science worlds.
So let's try one more time.
I like this forum.
Yeah.
It's really the other community there.
I spent a number of years working at a global design firm and doing big design projects. We redesigned Public Library of Science, PLOS's publishing workflow, we designed the participation system for ICANN, and often, even if as a designer working in the design of these systems, you want to embrace the needs of the users on the outside, the people funding it and who are paying for it, they will tell you, like, the ICANN work, they're like, we want more participation. We're like, this is how you get more participation. You do a mentoring program. They're like, no, we don't want that kind of participation. You can't solve those problems. Do this narrow thing. And so even though you could do the design research and say, yes, what you need to do is make it personal connection so that you can have a democratic, inclusive process. They're like, we don't want that. And so we designed the mock-ups for it. We said, you should build this. They said no. And we had to build the thing they were paying for. Another organization, Public Library of Science, which is a nonprofit dedicated to helping people publish, they're much more open to saying that the publisher's process, the author, needed to be incorporated into it. And so the power structures in the organizations that are funding the development of this stuff, they're, even if the designers want to do the right thing, they're not going to let you.
So what does that mean? What does that mean? That means it's about money and power, right? And that's why I think the structure of the organizations that we build is really important. And I think that's why this conference is called what it is.
Yeah, well, that's why I quit, because I
was just going to say, you have to say no.
This is why we can't have nice things.
Ian Drisdale's here. He convened a workshop on design and UX in between the break, and Josh from Loconomics right next to me was with me on Dave Carroll faculty at Parsons here. We were covering some of these issues in a more granular way, And we did a thought experiment about Twitter changing the star to the heart. Okay? Now here's the thing that Twitter hasn't added a new user in the United States in 3 years. Okay, it's gonna die if it doesn't do something. Okay? So they did tests and they found that if they changed the star to the heart, they would increase engagement, and they did, and all the core users went crazy, and Twitter engagement is up 6%. So let me ask, as a thought experiment, let's say you're the platform co-op who runs Twitter. I come to you with a test. We're dying. The only way we can live is if we change the star to a heart. Raise your hand to vote. Yes.
Yeah, why?
Huh? You don't know until you do a test.
So I say we have done a test. We can tell you that if we change the star to a heart, we're going to increase engagement 6%. I need everyone to raise your hand and say yes to do it. No one will, and there's the problem.
Why can't there be another option though? Like you've given us the choice to say yes or no to that. Why can't we have the heart and the star?
And then choose.
Well, that did come up in our discussion, so I'm not trying to remake the discussion we had, but we're just a thought experiment on the idea of executive control versus
consensus. You cannot have consensus.
Also, 51%.
Yeah.
Right. So that's just my thought experiment that we shared.
Can you give a short interpretation of that? Because I don't think I got to where you were pointing.
Just that the problem that we have in design and UX is that when we run data-driven tests, it may lead us down directions that we don't want to go. And so how do we reconcile that conflict without absolute executive control? This becomes a key challenge of platform co-ops in design and UX, when the data will tell us things that we need to survive that we don't want to do. So how do we resolve that?
Democracy.
Well,
I think survival trumps everything, right?
No, but I'm very worried about what is actually here I'm worried about what is the metric for engagement and why we've chosen that particular one. I mean, Twitter chose that particular one because they actually need better data on what people would buy, and there were 7 different uses of what the hell a star meant. So it was great that people engaged with it more, but it gave them much more accurate market analytics. So this is why it was there. And so it goes back to this question of having other kind of ways of measuring other kind of things. What are the other things? So not just other options, so it's not just star or heart, but other ways of actually increasing engagement, but also other ways of measuring other types of engagement.
Yeah.
I mean, so one of the problems with a kind of lean UX process and lean analytics is precisely what you choose to measure. And those are the things that are given to you by the client. They're the things that are often difficult to dispute. But, Six is indicating this is exactly where design schools and design research should be having the leadership in that regard. You need to be. And I would just say, just very briefly, in terms of the previous comment, on the other hand, that model is dying everywhere. It's not just Twitter. And so companies are desperately looking for other metrics and other analytics and other innovations and other forms of engagement, and they're doing it horribly and badly, and that's good.
Yeah, I'm appreciating that. Okay, so Seda wanted to ask a question, and then Barth.
I was wondering how much of the service industry ideology we want to stick to in the platforms, and here's my summary. It's a very dark one, but I'll try. So it's there's a user-developer dichotomy. So there are developers, and then there's nothing in between, and then users, right? And you throw the software at them. You don't speak to the user. You watch them all the time to figure out if they're having problems. And you tell them that there's machine learning that's that neutral source of all worldly good, and the labor that makes it work, this machine learning, that it's not just algorithms, all the labor you make invisible. And in order to keep the users going, you release 14 new features a day, which I love Marina's comment about Uber drivers losing their favorite features and stuff. So when all of these things are actually totally juxtaposed with negatively with labor, I wonder how much we want to keep the service idea of when we develop platforms.
The service idea in those who are developing, or the service idea as the concept driving the platform?
Service in the sense that the platform, the idea that we build platforms that serve workers, like Google serves you
Right.
at all of these costs. Like, is this the model we want to keep?
No.
Do we want to break it? Yeah, this is how I'm playing out. You'll take it. But what's the alternative is my question as well, I guess, right? Or how do we develop one and make it easier?
That's a good question. And I don't know, the session before I was in, blockchain, there are all kinds of promises of that, but remains to be seen.
I would like to see crowdfunding that would pay developers not to work for corrupt corporations. Don't take that job. Here, we'll give you a few bucks to get there and some suggestions.
Our parallel organisation is talking about debt jubilees, which might also be necessary to get to that point.
Debt jubilee.
I have a question about the measurement story that we're discussing here. Like, for instance, when we think about these platforms, be it a worker platform or a very social platform, doesn't matter, I think. Usually their power comes from the networks that they build over time, right? One. And secondly, the activity that they measure on these networks. You know, who buys what from whom, which service, or what you like or not, etc., etc. So, and aside from the the rights that we discuss here, like the usual rights for the worker, basic rights, I think we have to focus a bit more on the new types of rights that are, I think, emerging. One is, I think, is the ownership of data, the metadata you have as a worker in these platforms, and all the relationships that you build over time. And as we all know, you can download your contacts from Facebook or whatever. Also, all the media you put there as well, but you can never get the relationship of those items or those contacts. It's never given to you. It's actually the asset they own, right? So, as unions, for instance, how would you focus on this type of values that belongs to the user or slash worker slash people?
Can try.
Okay, I'm going to try to answer that. So one thing that I would like to imagine, one thing that we've been talking about in the German context is like, okay, if we're going to make an argument about how should these platforms that are labor platforms be governed, right? And one answer to that is, well, we should extend the Works Constitution Act, which is the German law that says if you're an employee of a company that's above a certain size, you have these rights, you can form a works council, and that 50% of seats on the board of directors should be reserved for elected representatives of workers, and they should have all the rights that members of the board of directors should have. The question then is, okay, well, it's not going to look exactly the same, right? Because the socio-technical arrangement is different. So what are the rights of, the question is, what are the rights in general of workers who work on a platform and, for example, are economically dependent on the platform? And so my only answer to your question is say, let's make a list together, right? It's not an answer, but it's like, yeah, let's put them up. And one of the, and I think Marina already talked about transparency of algorithms, right? So, okay, we're not going to require all corporate platforms to be 100% open source, probably, but like the Works Council in the German context has rights to information and consultation. Well, are we going to, for example, call to specify in the case of platform-based work that one of the rights that the Works Council has, one of the things that the Works Council has a right to information about is the algorithm, or to look at the piece of code that decides whether or not you're going to get your account closed automatically when your rating goes below a certain number.
Or your access to jobs, or that's the...
Yeah, what jobs can you see?
Yeah. But I think we do have a certain list, but it's not complete. I mean, anybody can contribute to this, but this, I'm always wondering in the whole discussion about these working platforms that the fact with these rating systems is not really discussed deeply, because it's very crucial, because it decides about your access to chances, to work, to income, to everything, and it's a big deal. And I think like this is what we should address in the first place, and in a normal company in Germany where you have the system, because it measures your performance, right? And this is highly regulated even by the Works Council in a company, and this is why, because you say, all the startup people might not like it, but the standard is the medium performance, not the top performance, because not everybody is always a top performer. So there are standards in like in defining the performance, the middle performance, what about the medium? The norm for performance, 100%, it's not 150, 100% is the medium performance, and this is really crucial. And these platforms are just do it as they want. And this is the first thing I would say. Then with the data, with privacy, the thing is that in our country, there's this principle of that you must record as little data as possible. So this is which is the very opposite of big data. This was marvelous. I mean, it's of course companies abuse it sometimes, but we are fighting actually to uphold this value because this is also important. Because if you look at platforms like Upwork, they can do all of kind of shit with your data. They can, for example, change your prices, like. For certain days, maybe Sundays, when everybody needs the presentation for Monday, then the people who make presentations get more money or less money or whatever. They are capable of all doing this, and I mean, this has to become controlled by the workers. Absolutely.
Okay, so we don't really have much time, so time is basically up, and there are still so many questions. So we have this, might be quite enticing to you, so there will be, when you leave this room, hopefully, there will be a reception. With lots of food and drink.
Oh shit.
Just take these questions and hold them to this place.
A lot of regulations.